Total War is a series with over 25 years of history, and two massive titles in Total War Medieval 3 and Warhammer 40k have just been announced. But if you're not all that familiar with the franchise, but are eager to get started, it might be hard to figure out where to begin. With so many games and so many time periods and settings, there is a diverse selection here, and in this video, I'll be your guide to the entirety of the Total War franchise for more than the past 2 decades. For the purposes of this video, we will not be including the original 2D Shogun and Medieval, as I find them to be too outdated for a modern audience to enjoy to the fullest. In fact, we're gonna do something special and cover this series from a chronological time period standpoint, not from point of release, which I find is a bit easier on the mind. If you're new to the series or need a bit of a refresher, the main thing about Total War that makes it so special in gaming is that it is by and large the only series that offers a combination of turn-based grand campaigns with accompanying maps, where you lead your nation or people to war and peace against others, raise your economy and raise armies, while also offering massive, cinematic real-time battles where these armies are put to use. This means that instead of armies being mere representative miniatures on the campaign map, like many other games do, Total War actually seeks to combine grand strategy with tactics, and in many ways offers a holistic and all-encompassing approach to strategy gaming. In addition, it should be said that the foundational concept in Total War games actually remain quite similar throughout time. This means that if you know how to play one Total War game, you're likely to understand at least about 50% on the next one, since many of the core features remain the same. For example, you're likely to know about 90% of how each Total War from Rome Remastered all the way to Shogun 2 works, and about the same goes for Rome 2 to Warhammer 3. That's the main gist of it. So let's dive even deeper into what makes each game unique and see which one you might prefer to play next. And of course, I have individual reviews for basically every one of the Total War games listed here, which can be found on the channel. Our very first Total War game takes us all the way back to the Bronze Age in the 13th century BC. So far back in fact that we're basically outside the scope of most strategy games here. This is a Total War Saga Troy, a focused experience that centers itself on Greece and the Ionian coast during the famous Trojan Wars. You might have noticed that this game is not just called Total War Troy, but a Total War Saga Troy. And let me clear this up for a minute. Total War used to label certain focused games as quote-unquote saga titles, games that would not feature massive scopes, but more zoomed down and up and close experiences. As we'll see, only 2 games in the series are saga titles, and they're both focused on very regional conflicts taking place during shorter in-game time spans. In Troy's case, this means that we're indeed focusing on the Trojan War, and the Trojan War only, at least in terms of theme. In Troy, you choose your legendary leader among a rather vast selection of unique factions. And I choose my words wisely here, because Troy does a very good job of representing both their leaders and their factions in their own lights. Here, faction leaders are treated as legends, being uniquely powerful heroes that can elevate both your faction as a whole and your armies. If you know anything about super ancient Greece and Homer's epics of the Odyssey and the Iliad, there's no doubt in my mind you'll recognize many if not all of the cast members here, at least names like Achilles and Odysseus, but perhaps also Agamemnon, Hector, and Paris. I love the way they're renditioned here, but what makes them special is again their unique campaign traits. This means that playing as Agamemnon offers you various gameplay challenges you won't get anywhere else. Agamemnon is a character best suited for empire builders, as he gets increased resources and income the more vassals he accumulates. He also relies on heavily armored units and as such is a slow and steady conqueror in the traditional sense. On the other side of the Aegean Sea, we have Paris, who features a different type of feature I very much like. Paris famously tempted Helen to his side, and so a major feature of playing as Paris is Helen herself. Helen doesn't want to be away from Paris for too long, and even though she's not a legendary character in her own right, she can be moved from city to city. As long as Paris and Helen are close by, Helen is kept happy and will be able to reward your faction with bonuses. The opposite is true if Helen's mood sours, and if she's been away from Paris for too many turns in a row. At the same time, Paris competes with his brother Hector for his father's love, and as with all fathers, this love is among other factors won by conquering enemy cities and honoring the gods. This makes playing as Paris wildly different from an Agamemnon playthrough, not just because they're part of different alliances and peninsulas, but because of the work that has gone into making every faction unique. What further makes Troy so special is its focus on historical authenticity, despite being a mostly mythological game. First, the gods and religion is wildly important, imploring you to raise temples to your chosen deity lest they bring catastrophes across your land.
Gods bring many boons to your faction both on the campaign map and in battles, and compared to other Total War games, the religious system assumes a very active role here. And second, Troy's economic system is a marvel on its own, not at all focusing on money, but instead offering various resources that essentially run the entire game. Here you must collect materials like wood, gold, and bronze, and if you're short on any of them, you can always consider bartering with your neighbors for more. Indeed, Troy's a fascinating game because of its many campaign options. If you own the appropriate DLC, we have 3 different modes to choose from, namely Historical, Truth Behind the Myth, and Full Mythological mode. As you might be able to tell, these go from least to most mythological and as such offer settings that hopefully suit your tastes. But in my opinion, since Historical mode mostly feels like a stripped down version of mythological, and Truth Behind the Myth kind of feels like a half-baked mode, I'd argue that Mythos is by far the best mode here, because Mythos really brings this world to life, be it with beautiful artwork lighting up our skies, gods having an actual impact on campaign gameplay, and unique and fun in-game missions surrounding mythological aspects of ancient Greece and their pantheon. Of course, there are 2 sides to each Total War game, the second one dealing with the battle maps. If you enjoy rather fast-paced but action-filled battles, Troy is likely going to suit you. Here we're given fairly unique battle maps in Total War terms, as they focus on feeling naturally part of the Mediterranean environment, while at the same time seeking to offer things like hillsides and choke points. At the same time, more than in most other games in the series, the terrain has a huge impact on how units behave, such as vastly slowing them down and weakening attack power. As a concept, this is nothing new in these games, but the severity in which they work is in my opinion much more clear here. If you're additionally playing in mythological mode, Troy offers everything from lightly armored soldiers to heavily armored ones, chariot riders, and completely mythological creatures taken straight out of the old stories. It's a whole vibe and a beautiful one at that, and is perfectly complemented by the similarly beautiful artwork on the campaign, truly enshrouding us in Bronze Age Greece. And so, if you're into battles that might not be super historical, but definitely pack a punch, and a campaign that focuses on the Trojan War, a smaller region but offers a massive playground, and adore factions that feel truly different from each other, Troy is one of the best ones out there.
The second game on this list is Total War Pharaoh, but the interesting part here is that Pharaoh is split in 2. It began encompassing Egypt, the Levant and Anatolia only, with the player either taking on the Preserver of the Great Kingdoms or the Destroyer as part of the Sea People Raiders. The second part is Pharaoh Dynasties, the entirely free update that significantly improves the game, adding not just Troy's territories of Greece and Western Anatolia, but also the vast lands of Assyria and Mesopotamia, vastly increasing the scope, diversity and fun of the game. At its core, Pharaoh can seem quite similar to Troy, but we have many key differences here. As part of any of the major cultures, you can fight for supremacy within that culture's grand kingdom, attempting to establish yourself as the unified king of said culture. Indeed, this system is so important that there's a whole hierarchy of offices and positions within them, encouraging intrigue and infighting. As the name of the update suggests, the game even has its very own family and dynasty system, which is simply fantastic. Gods are worshipped on an individual basis and can be discovered over time, meaning you build temples to a variation of them, which in turn provides different bonuses. Provinces now have these smaller locations you may turn into supply stations or fortifications, and buildings now also require available workers to begin construction, somewhat deepening city management. Battles are improved with weather having a major impact on units, new types of armor values, a lethality system that makes battles actually lethal and feel realistic, forests can be set on fire, and the visual effects of mud, blood, and other dirty business is so beautifully renditioned when in contact with anything from the soldiers themselves to grass and rivers. The campaign map is arguably the most beautiful in any Total War game, and there's just something so amazing about Pharaoh Dynasty specifically that you'll want to keep coming back to it. The game of course still takes place during the same Bronze Age time period, and even though much has been fixed since the original Pharaoh release, if you're not interested in the time period, not much will save that. So consider Pharaoh Dynasties an amazing title on its own, with such a wealth of content, but your mileage will vary depending on whether you're cool with the era and the lack of things like catapults and more recognizable, more modern arms and armor.
Our next title suddenly jumps about 1,000 years into the future, into a much more classically Total War time period, namely the era of Rome. We have 2 Rome games in the series, although we technically have 3, because one of these is a remaster. And because the original is no longer for sale, I'll be showing you Total War Rome Remastered first. The original Rome was my first Total War ever, and even though the remaster is slightly different in a few places, I find that it mostly exclusively improves on the original. Rome Total War is a truly grand experience and was absolutely revolutionary for its time, being the first fully 3D Total War game. These graphics were out of this world, and even though they're slightly improved upon in the remaster, the soul remains the same. Contrary to Troy, Rome offers a grand campaign that spans the whole of ancient Europe, North Africa, and the Near East, meaning we're way past being a regional game here. To accompany this map, Rome allows us to play as wildly different cultures, from the Romans to the Greeks, Carthaginians, the Gauls, and many others. And even though they mostly do not have unique faction mechanics like in Troy, they do play differently. Each culture sports their own cultural building types, for example, which is one of the main signifiers of Rome's cultures. This is an aspect of Rome Total War that heavily focuses on the Romans. Only the Roman factions, of which there are 3 playable by the way, have a Senate function. The Senate does 3 things essentially. It gives you missions to conquer various cities or perform tasks, it allows your well-performing generals to obtain offices which makes them better at administrating cities or waging war, and the Senate even has an opinion of the Roman factions. But here's the thing, and if you obtain the love of the people, you begin posing a threat to the Senate. In essence, the Roman game is all about being better than the other Romans, and finally wrestle control of Rome itself from the Senate. Seeing as none of the other factions have any equivalent missions or mechanics, it's kind of a shame, but it doesn't diminish the core experience here. Rome Total War is old school, but thankfully mostly in the best way, and it laid the groundwork for everything that came after. In Rome, your cities are made up of actual populations, and you get to upgrade your cities once your population reaches certain numbers. This is vital to do, and in fact, is how you progress in Rome's technology system. You see, back in the good old days, there were no proprietary technology or research trees. No, back in my day, technological progress was inherently tied to societal progress, and in many ways this really does make sense. This means again that you have to expand your economy, your population, and your cities to get that military edge, as they both go hand in hand. In Rome, your cities aren't made up of an arbitrary number of available building slots, like in the later games. For the most part, every building can be raised in every settlement, meaning expanding your cities always feels organic and can always fit your purposes. And one of my personal favorite parts of this, building icons actually look like the buildings they're meant to represent. All of this combined makes for a campaign experience that in itself doesn't really age, because it feels really immersive to build that empire. And what's more, is that I love that your armies can not only place watchtowers to expand your line of sight, both within and outside your borders, but that we can actually place down forts. This means that we can effectively alter the map, creating all new zones of control and defensive positions. It's the type of feature that really makes a game for me and brings a whole different level of strategy. Speaking of armies, Rome Total War, like every game up until Rome 2 mind you, allows you to split your armies into however many pieces the situation allows for. This means that individual units do not need a general to move around. It's a system that feels so natural that it seems weird that it was ever changed in the first place. A great side effect of having captains captain your armies instead of generals is that if you lead them into battle and win under certain conditions, you actually get the option to adopt the general into your family, providing you with another mighty general to lead your armies and govern your cities. And speaking of generals, what Rome offers here is nothing short of legendary, and yet it seems so intuitive and natural. Your generals in Rome do have certain skills they upgrade over time, such as their command ability. But as you use them in battle, these generals actually gain traits based on their experience and your use, making each general that much more unique. Of course, there is no Rome Total War without those battles, and even though they were so revolutionary back in the day, with terrain actually geographically matching the exact place on the campaign map you fought, with general speeches before the battle, and those amazing graphics showcasing Rome's vast fields and cities, it's arguably the game's Achilles heel at the moment. It's not terrible, but certainly has its limitations. The AI can be extremely passive or just downright bad with pathfinding, although I will say this is not always the case. Perhaps the worst point of frustration comes with individual unit pathfinding when playing with or around city walls, where things can become a jumbled mess. And even though the visuals now can actually look fairly great, the biggest issue to me concerns the animations, which do remain as they were in 2004. That being said, very little beats leading a Roman army into battle, arguably being the game's most versatile force. But we have Greeks here too, with their massive phalanx armies, and everything from lightly armored but dangerous barbarians to the horseless Scythians. It does help immensely, however, that Rome Remastered has been optimized as much as possible for newer hardware, meaning 4K resolutions, widescreen, and higher frame rates. Furthermore, this remastered version also features Rome's 2 expansions, namely the Alexander campaign, that lets you play as Alexander in his quest to conquer Persia, and the much larger Barbarian Invasion campaign, which sees you take Rome through its massive split into the Western and Eastern empires, in its last days of the late antiquity period, even allowing you to play as the barbarians invading it. It's one of my favorite Total War expansions ever, and having it all included makes this remastered version all the better. Rome Total War remains a fantastic game these days, especially now that arguably the best mod to ever exist for it, RTR Imperium Surrectum, expands it to insane depth and scale, with a much larger campaign and all new beautifully made units and features, with even much more to come, and all for free on the Steam Workshop. It does however feel old in certain places that matter, but if you love a wholesome simplicity and some of the series' absolute best organic development features and music, yes, we mustn't forget about that amazing soundtrack of course, then Rome Remastered should definitely be on your radar, especially if you find it on sale.
Rome is also the first of the games to receive a dedicated mobile version, a great port of the game by the way, which also retains those original visuals, but with amazing performance, so consider playing it on either iOS or Android if that sounds appealing.
And then there's Rome 2. Up until now in the franchise, Total War games have felt rather similar and obeyed many of the same rules. Some have technology trees and some have city building slots, but other than that, they have mostly functioned in the same core ways, and we'll of course get back to those games later. Rome 2 changes most aspects of gameplay, and depending on how you see it, for better or worse. It can't be denied that Rome 2 is ambitious and grand as no other Total War game though, and still very much holds up today, at least with a certain mod I'll mention later. Rome 2 returns to the same time period and setting as the original Rome, but now on a whole different scale. Rome 2 sported the largest Total War map ever made, with by far the most factions both playable and not. It truly does feel so expansive this time around, in a way no other Total War has done in the same way, honestly before or ever since. But that does not mean everything is perfect, and even though I love the visuals and scale, and even the campaign music which is just so immersive, that's where the unequivocal positives end for me. You see, Rome 2 certainly dares to try a whole lot of stuff, but it's not necessarily just great. Here we have an entire political system that, while it works, is a bit too cumbersome to fully maneuver even though it's not all that deep, a family tree system that I suppose works, but because the characters are all able to level up in the same way, just doesn't feel as awesome as it used to, and of course, the introduction of perhaps the two greatest missteps in Total War history, arbitrary limits on your factions and the new province system. So let's see here. In Rome 2, and every game going forward, how many armies, agents, and edicts you may field and use are now limited by an imperium level, meaning how large your faction is. This means that for large parts of the early game, you're actually just limited to a few armies for example, but no matter how big you are, there's always a certain limit on armies, agents, and edicts, which really just doesn't make natural sense. What's more is that armies now have to be led by a commanding general, meaning there's no more use of smaller tactical armies led by captains. And forget about building forts, now we have army stances, which I suppose are fine in themselves, but they also serve to add non-immersive features that do not improve on what was there in the past necessarily. In terms of the province system, each city anywhere now belongs to a province, and for some reason, all cities in the province share public order levels and population numbers, the latter which by the way has also been completely gamified into no longer showing actual people, but an arbitrary number going up as you collect more growth. To make matters worse, not only do we have a building slot system, but each city is no longer its own entity. Each province has only one large city in them, with the others being merely towns that can raise only certain types of buildings. Again, they're not just bad, in fact they can be fun, and I think if you are a new player, this might not even matter to you, or may even be fun since it arguably forces you to prioritize more than before. But to me, all of these changes seem so arbitrary and nonsensical, not made to make the experience more immersive, but to just have you make numbers go up, and to create new categories that can be easily controlled. In some ways, these restrictions make for a bit of a tighter experience when you need to make the most of what you got. And like I said, it's not necessarily bad, it's just less organic, which to me is a downgrade. Of course, with over 800 hours in Rome 2, the vastness and variety of this game speaks for itself. In terms of factions, cultures, and historical accuracy, Rome 2 expands and improves upon everything Rome 1 did, meaning it's now more fun and flavorful to play as anyone from Rome to the Greeks, Carthaginians, Gauls, and whoever you may choose. This is also where those battles come in. Rome 2 features some of the series' most spectacular battles, owed to the sheer number of units, armies, and how they all look. They certainly play a bit faster than previous Total Wars do, but for the most part, the AI is capable, and with the return of large-scale siege battles and even Roman naval battles, including amphibious assaults, the versatility of Rome 2 cannot be discounted. Rome 2 also comes with a number of expansion packs which on sale might very much be to your liking, with everything from Caesar's campaign in Gaul to the Roman Empire Divided where you get to play as Aurelian. Of course, this leaves the vast Rome 2 Steam Workshop, where we can easily download the many amazing mods. My favorite happens to be DVD et Impera, or DEI for short, a mod that seriously deepens and expands on the Rome 2 experience. In other words, Rome 2 might be the best Total War game to start with if you're new to the franchise and love this time period, because despite its shortcomings, Rome 2 is arguably the quintessential Total War historical blockbuster. A game that's very similar to Rome 2, mimicking what we'll see with Empire and Napoleon later on, is the next game in the series, namely Total War Attila. Attila is indeed a special one because it's simultaneously the modern Total War I love the most and the game with the biggest Achilles heel of them all, namely its performance. All I'm saying is, make sure to set your shadow settings to quality, never to max quality, and you'll see a 50% performance increase. No biggie. Either way, Attila essentially takes the Rome 2 experience to the late antiquity dark times, when the massive Roman Empire has been split in two halves. You'd think this would be an easy campaign since you're so massive, but here's the thing. The Western Roman Empire suffers from massive public order issues, financial issues, and lots of incoming enemies on the horizon. The Eastern Empire is admittedly better off, but must also contend with incoming barbarian hordes and the rival Sassanid Empire in the east. And of course, there's Attila. The game is centered around Attila's coming, and this goes for whoever you're playing as. Attila features a deep fertility system, religious systems, governor system, and even a climate change system, and as such just feels so much better than Rome 2 in my opinion. But again, beware, this is a hardcore experience, and if you are playing as the Roman empires, you best be prepared to play many defensive battles, and to lose many of them at that. This is a much darker game, filled with many more barbarians, this time some of them coming in as hordes, meaning not settled factions. These mechanics give Attila that sense of depth Rome 2 just seemed to lack, but thanks to performance issues, which in large part makes the game not as much fun to play if you're playing on mid to lower range rigs, and even bottlenecks the most powerful hardware out there, holds it back to this day. Attila also offers some great expansions though, with my favorite one offering a kind of medieval light campaign where you get to control Charlemagne himself on a detailed map of Western Europe.
Again, Attila is essentially Rome 2 with more details and better mechanics, packed in a more hardcore experience, but one that sadly performs markedly worse. But if you can stomach the performance, Attila offers some of the best Total War has to show you, and it gets even better when you factor in the amazing modding scene that still flourishes, like the impressive Medieval Kingdoms 1212 AD mod, or the amazing and newly released Lord of the Rings mod, The Dauntless Days.
Now, even though Total War 3 Kingdoms is set in the 3rd century, meaning about 100 years before Attila, I made an exception since Attila is so close to Rome 2. But now it's time to move to China, to a time period and setting known as the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. This is a game that seeks to unify what Creative Assembly learned with the Warhammer series, while adding a new layer of complexity on its own. And even though I personally am a bit put off by the setting here, the game mechanics are actually quite fantastic. Three Kingdoms focuses a whole lot on making each character or faction feel unique, meaning there's built-in mechanics here for example taking over the world like usual, or winning the campaign by economic or diplomatic means. But the most important aspect of Three Kingdoms is arguably in its diplomatic gameplay, where so much has changed. If you're into diplomacy, and especially if you love the Chinese setting, this is definitely the game for you, because this is where Total War for once has truly invested into giving us many new and various options for maneuvering. It's definitely a bit more complex than other Total Wars, but take your time and you will figure it out in due time. Three Kingdoms features a new and quite awesome recruitment feature, where units are mustered over time and not instantly after a turn, which does mean you'll have to think more about which armies you want new units in. Armies, by the way, are separated into the command of various generals, with each one being able to recruit units based on their type. Three Kingdoms battles play quite nicely, and both the campaign and battles perform really well. But depending on your preference, Three Kingdoms doesn't necessarily feature the most awesome units. For the most part, you'll be playing with lightly armored peasant-like units, where only the high-end and more late-game units are what I would describe as awesome looking. Either way, it's all trying to be authentic of course, so if this is something you like and value, then all the more power to you. Three Kingdoms is quite a massive game and offers DLC campaigns that offer other experiences in different time periods, but often with the same characters. So if you love Chinese history with a dash of mythology or fantasy elements like super powerful heroes, then Three Kingdoms might just be for you. Jumping about half a century ahead now, we got Thrones of Britannia. This was the first Saga title CA released, and takes place exclusively on the British Isles during the Viking Age. The thing about this game is that if you love the Viking Age and stories like The Last Kingdom, then you're probably going to love at least parts of this game as well. But to me, Thrones is a bit dreary and lacks the performance gains of later games, performing almost as bad as Attila. It's all about the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings here, and this map for Britain is really big. The novelty of Thrones is that your characters grow to have holdings, making them more or less powerful and loyal. It sort of tries to Crusader Kingsify things a little in this way, but it's certainly a lot less complex than that game. It keeps a lot of the same concept as the other post-Rome 2 games, but does something quite interesting with its armies. Much like Three Kingdoms, armies are now recruited over time, which again creates interesting scenarios where you'll have to be smart about recruitment. The battles in Thrones are very reminiscent of those in Attila, although it's much more Viking focused. This means that it can seem a bit samey over time, but again, if this setting is your cup of tea, it probably won't mind you. There's further a great mod here called Shield Wall, which enhances the experience further by adding new and great mechanics. And now for a true legend. Medieval 2 Total War is arguably the greatest Total War of all time, especially if you ask the veterans of the historical Total War games. This time we find ourselves in the Middle Ages and must deal with the consequences. In most ways that matter gameplay-wise, Medieval 2 actually plays exactly the same as Rome. We choose our factions the same way, raise our populations and cities the same way, and move our armies the same way. As such, you'll absolutely feel at home in Medieval 2 if you played Rome, and that's a good thing. But let's go deeper, because it's in the details that Medieval 2 really thrives. Medieval 2 begins in the year 1080, a pivotal era to say the least. In a few years, this will be the age of the Crusades, where the Pope issues massive invasions of targeted non-Catholic or excommunicated cities. For those participating, i.e. Catholic factions, this means a whole lot of things. Catholicism is the bread and butter of religions in Medieval 2, for the very reason that this is where like 99% of the religious mechanics are. The College of Cardinals functions almost exactly like the Senate in Rome, although now they're arguably more important. Cardinals are not only powerful priests who spreads your religion throughout your land, but can also influence the faith in foreign cities and, importantly, actually become the Pope, based on the votes of other Catholic factions. Now the Pope is his own faction, but by allying with the Pope or indeed having the Pope be from your country, you can accumulate piety points, in essence make the Pope like you more. This not only allows you to get away with more stuff, like, say, attacking other Catholic countries, but can also let you choose the next crusade target, perhaps giving you a head start on getting there, and importantly, recruit those crusading units. Muslims on the other hand are able to call jihads as a sort of countermeasure. Medieval 2 sports no official surface level unique faction mechanics like Troy for example, but they do exist. First of all, Christian and Muslim factions can raise culturally and religious specific buildings, but even between Northern and Southern European factions do we have culture specific building designs, which is such a beautiful touch. The game continues Rome's amazing granularity and focusing on non-arbitrary mechanics and player choice, meaning number 1, armies can be split however many times you want without needing a general. Generals obtain skills based on their actual actions on the campaign map and in battles, and you can for the most part raise every building in every city. But Medieval 2 takes everything a step further to conform more to the medieval time period. Here, settlements are divided into economy-focused cities and military-focused castles, both offering unique possibilities to either seriously develop your trading and development economic base, where cities only really offer citizen-based levies, or the might of the castles and their feudal knights and powerful archers. What's more is that every settlement can actually be converted into the other type, meaning we have even more choice here. But arguably the best and biggest upgrade comes in the form of Medieval 2's battles, where both the visuals, animations, and AI are so insanely improved it's hard to believe it, and arguably where Total War battles have never been better. Medieval 2's soldiers fight so organically it just seems so natural the way they charge and fight. Sieges and pathfinding are so much better than in Rome, and when combined with the system on the campaign, where you can upgrade your soldiers' weapon and armor, you can actually see those changes visually on the soldiers. The battles also take advantage of Medieval 2's unique setting. Taking place from about 1080 to 1530 at the latest, Medieval 2 sees you going through various stages of technological development, meaning you begin by recruiting relatively lightly armored spearmen and archers to commanding heavy knights and even gunpowder units. This makes this game even more versatile and transition heavy than Rome, and is all the better for it. Medieval 2 saw one expansion in Kingdoms, where the original Grand Campaign offered a map of Europe, North Africa, and the Near East, essentially the exact same map as Rome. The Kingdoms expansion offers 4 focused campaigns, one on the Crusades, Britannia, the Teutonic Order in the Baltics, and one in the Americas. Each campaign is better than the last, with all new music, events, and challenges. The only thing I would caution with Medieval 2 on newer hardware is that it's not exactly optimized. It will for the most part run great, that's not the issue. The issue is that things run too smooth. Panning the campaign map is just way too fast, but other than that, Medieval 2 is arguably the overall best total war game ever made, and if you love the Middle Ages, there's no better option. We haven't even touched upon the numerous and magical mods out there, which deepen this experience immensely. Don't forget that Medieval 2 Kingdoms also offers hot seat mode, meaning it's possible to play with more than one player on the same computer by taking turns.
Remember also that Medieval 2 is now available on mobile, including iOS and Android, and improves on the actual PC game with minor fixes and additions here and there. Has a new upscaled UI with even mouse and keyboard support, and I very much recommend the mobile version too.
Now comes one of the most beloved Total War games of all time, even though it might not be the majority's personal favorite, Shogun 2. Shogun 2 takes up the mantle of the very first game in the series, and offers up a massive map of feudal Japan, a time of samurai and its warring clans. Shogun 2 appears polished and simple, yet so much fun to actually play. The UI is beautiful and minimalistic, but now sporting a family tree and a more engaging tech tree. The building system is similar to that in Empire, which we'll get to, but much more fun to expand this time around due to more meaningful options. For the most part, despite faction strengths and weaknesses being mostly stat and to a degree unit based, most of Shogun 2's factions play mostly the exact same on the surface. It's all about finding your favorite colored samurai and starting position really, as this latter factor really determines much of the difficulty of your campaign. Now though, for the first time, we have a massive late game challenge known as Realm Divide occurring once you reach certain powerful heights. Despite being kind of broken, it's a fun challenge to have to fight the entire map for dominance in one go, and does at least shake up any campaign. In many ways, if you know the last games like Empire and Napoleon, Shogun 2 is very easy to get into. It's almost like a Medieval 2 version of Empire, mixing aspects from each. But in the end, Shogun 2's battles are much like its campaign. They're polished and feel great, although, again, you kinda have to love samurai and the Japanese vibe to love them, since every army sports almost similar types of units. That's not necessarily a bad thing, just remember that you should probably have an affinity for most things feudal Japan here. The same goes doubly for Shogun 2's first DLC, Rise of the Samurai, which takes us back in time. This is a small campaign compared to the game's largest standalone expansion however, Fall of the Samurai, which we will get back to later, due to it now being a standalone title. The next game on our list is none other than Empire Total War, a legendary and mystery-shrouded game if there ever were one. And if you're a fan of the Imperial Age of Empires, then this is certainly the game for you. What made Empire so different was that it took the series into a territory it had never treaded before, namely that of its focus on long-range rifle and cannon warfare, and importantly, awesome and massive naval battles, which also made it into Shogun 2 by the way. Empire ups the scales in other ways too. First of all by offering a map that spans good old Europe and the Near East, but also the Americas and India, all in the same campaign. In this way, Empire's scale is simply unmatched. It introduces 2 features I'm especially fond of. The first is that instead of just having cities starting the map, we now also get small villages that expand as time goes by. These only offer 1 building per town, but they become important resource hotspots that can also be targeted by the enemy for raids, meaning they're valuable and important for both an economic and from a war perspective. The second feature I love is trade lanes, meaning you can send ships to establish trade routes back to friendly ports. These can make you wildly rich in the long run, but do of course require a powerful navy to defend, since not only can you be attacked at the point of a trade node, but you may also have your trade lanes raided along its route. Empire has a ton of factions to choose from, and many of them are of course the usual suspects: England, France, Spain, Austria, the Ottomans, Sweden, and so you kinda get a good feel of this era. I also love that we have actual revolutions here, meaning you may become a revolutionary republic by having worse enough public order. Empire retains the army nature from the past games once more, meaning from Rome to Shogun 2, and continues to allow us to set up those iconic forts to create defensive positions manually, and I love that. Sadly, Empire has for all intents and purposes gotten rid of any semblance of a family tree and even real events, and it's for the most part the most bare bones of Total War games in terms of historical and gameplay flavor in this way. At the same time, Empire was the first game to sadly get rid of the original Total War building layout. Now we have building slots with a severely limited number of options, and it really just kills that developmental vibe Total War used to do so well. This also coincidentally happens to be when Total War introduces an actual technology tree, where you spend turns researching new advancements. Love it or hate it, the fact that it diminishes the importance of the cities and society itself as a driver of tech is immersion breaking in my opinion, and does gamify the experience somewhat. Where Empire is unique though is of course in its battles like mentioned before. That is, uniquely great and uniquely bad. I love that Total War actually tries something different and does it mostly well. Having those massive rank and file armies shooting at each other is something special indeed, and using cavalry to effectively unravel the enemy line is really satisfying. Naval battles also work really well, and it's one of the only places where we get the scale and grandeur to our navies. The other side of the coin is not as pretty. The AI on the battle map is some of the worst of any Total War, the siege battles are largely embarrassing as cities are for the most part non-existent, and sieging down forts is boring, repetitive, and often buggy. But if you can stomach that, Empire offers a time period and scale and a daring that no other Total War really does in the same way.
Empire has also received a dedicated mobile version, which is absolutely fantastic, adds a bunch of features from Napoleon, and unlocks every faction, even emergent ones, for the player. It even adds a new technology system where you can focus on multiple techs at once. And overall, it's just a fantastic, what I would call, mobile remaster.
This next Total War is closely linked with Empire, namely Napoleon. Napoleon fixes and polishes up the Empire experience to deliver a very similar type of game, now set in Europe alone or, if you wish to play these smaller campaigns, in Italy and Egypt. Napoleon sadly loses that scale and ambition Empire so benefits from, but it luckily prevails in the polish department. Napoleon is prettier, runs better, and offers better events than Empire. It's an overall much tighter and better experience for what it is, but it doesn't really bring that sense of how awesome this time period actually was. Empire and Napoleon are really great games, but both sadly have a few trade-offs, and therefore, we don't really have the optimal and ideal Imperial Age game in either one. But if you love the time period and general gameplay, then you can't really go wrong with either one. It's also fun that Napoleon is the first Total War to truly offer a functioning and public online multiplayer campaign for 2 players. But as with Medieval 2, Empire and Napoleon are sadly not optimized for 4K play, meaning you'll have a tiny UI if you choose to do so.
Napoleon is the latest mobile release from Total War and is also simply fantastic. There aren't as much new for Napoleon as Empire in terms of the mobile version, but what's here in terms of UI changes, controls and minor innovations are great. We get the tech upgrade Empire did for mobile, and even more playable factions in the Europe campaign, including Denmark, Portugal, Spain and the Ottoman Empire.
Fall of the Samurai is perhaps the best Total War expansion made Saga title of all time. Fall of the Samurai takes the Shogun 2 experience and tosses us into the latest time period ever for a Total War game, namely the mid to late 19th century. Here, the samurai are on their last legs as they come up against high-tech line infantry and powerful guns, and as 2 loose alliances fight over dominion over Japan, namely those loyal to the Emperor versus the allies of the Shogun. The campaign functions very similarly but with some major changes. The map has gone from looking peaceful and dreamy to more realistic and dark. Now, fleets can be used to bomb armies on land and even as artillery on the battlefield, and trains can bring your troops from one location to another. It's all really great, and you'll see a similar realm divide from here as well, like in the original campaign. The battlefield of Fall of the Samurai are some of the most versatile in the series, as it combines those long-range units with the more up-and-personal traditional warriors. It's a fantastic mix, and since our ships are more powerful than ever, even the naval battles stand out as a lot of fun. Fall of the Samurai offers a fantastic campaign all around, but again, playing in 4K causes UI troubles where everything is tiny, so be aware of that. And now comes the Warhammer games, and I think for the sake of ease, that will cover them in the same segment here, because they're actually very similar and part of a larger whole if you were to own all of them. Total War Warhammer 1 came out in 2016, and began a new adventure for Total War. Gone was the history, and in came the fantasy, with a whole lot of new bells and whistles. We now got hero units that are more powerful than hundreds of enemy soldiers, gigantic units, and even flying units, all working to spice up the battlefield. On the campaign map, the focus is now almost exclusively on unique faction mechanics. What's also happened though, almost like a trade-off, is that the details that used to be in Total Wars are just completely gone. Again, there's no population systems, characters no longer really age, and there's no overall feeling of the small but significant details like these being gone. If you love Warhammer, this might not be an issue, since you'll find very dedicated universes here that really brings the essence of Warhammer to life. In this way, each faction is very much unique from each other due to their mechanics, but other than these, the Total War foundation mostly remains the same, of course now with fireballs and they need to think more about casting abilities. Warhammer 1 deals with the old world, with the Empire, the Dwarves, the Greenskins, and the Chaos Invasion. Warhammer 2 offers the New World, heavily featuring elves, lizard and rat races, and Warhammer 3 focuses on the eastern parts of this world, on Kislev, Cathay, and the various Chaos Lords. All offer their own take on this world, but if you own all of them, you actually get to combine each map into one giant campaign, meaning you get to take the Empire, for example, on a journey to the New World and the Far East. This Immortal Empires campaign will admittedly cost a pretty penny, but if you find these games on sale and love this universe, you're probably gonna have a fantastic time here, especially considering the many mods that add to the game. If you felt like I've spent too little time with these games, then it's only because the three of them put together are so vast to begin with. And that about does it for the whole Total War series. It's a diverse and long-standing series to be sure, but one that still feels quite similar to its initial titles way back when. Let me know if you have any questions on any of these games, and please let me know if you found the video helpful. As always, make sure to leave a like and sub to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!